Our panel of political experts includes Norman Ornstein. Norm is a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, an election analyst for CBS News, and a contributor to the National Journal and Atlantic Magazine. Sitting to Norm's left is Steve Clemons. Steve is Washington editor-at-large for The Atlantic and editor of Atlantic Live. He's also senior fellow and founder of the American Strategy Program at the New America Foundation, a prominent think tank here in Washington. So, gentlemen, let's think beyond the Syria attack. When you look back at the first 100 days or so, what stands out for you as being President Trump's most significant achievement in office? And then we'll get to his most significant failure, in your view. His achievement, Norm, in a positive sense.
You remember that at one point, President Dwight Eisenhower, during the 1960 campaign, was asked about the most prominent achievement of his vice president, Richard Nixon. And what he said was, give me a week and I'll think of one. Give me a month and I'll think of one, in this case, Rob. We don't really have significant achievements. There are no legislative achievements to speak of. We've had a series of executive orders, and I suppose you could say that if you are looking at blowing up the climate change protocol, that's an achievement for the president. President Trump said a short while ago, I've had the most successful 13 weeks of any president. He'd only been in office 11 weeks at the time, but there's really nothing much there. And of course, his first major action, the travel ban, and the attempt to resurrect that travel ban have been rejected by the courts. His effort to get a major legislative accomplishment in repealing and replacing Obamacare has gone nowhere. And there is an enormous amount of infighting in the White House and in the administration at this point. So you have a White House that's been reeling, and other than the action in Syria, nothing that's really been bold, decisive, and at least at its initial glance, successful.
All right, we'll put you down as undecided.
Yes.
Steve.
I would agree with everything Norm said. I'd be slightly different in the sense that a couple of the more intangible, important things that Donald Trump has achieved, but I don't think many is he's changed the climate and temperature with the business community. Barack Obama really never achieved warm, deep connections with the broad business community. Donald Trump spends a lot of time with wide swaths of the business community, tries to appeal with them with a deregulatory set of executive orders and repeal of regulations. But I think beyond that, connecting them and meeting them is not insignificant. So he's changed that climate. I think the other thing that he has done is not done as much damage as he might have done in some foreign affairs issues. When he met with Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan, in Mar-a-Lago during their meeting, you had a North Korea missile test at that point. And the Donald Trump that we knew, that we had sort of seen before, flamboyant, threatening, might have overreacted at that moment, not understood that there's this, well-oiled theater that goes on with North Korea. And what I was impressed with, and maybe I shouldn't be too impressed, but Donald Trump did not use that moment to overreact and show the world. He made other mistakes, but sometimes you have to measure by what could have happened, and the fact that he didn't take America into a hot war right away in reaction to what was going on then. He might still down the road, but at least with the Japanese Prime Minister, that was not too bad.
So I feel like a game show host. Correct answer is Neil Gorsuch. His nomination of for him, a reasonably moderate conservative candidate that people thought was generally
you see
in
that
line.
as a victory?
I think for the president, I think it's probably his best day before the Syria.
I agree that it was his best day. Of course, it came with a Senate that is seeing its own norms shredded and an additional amount of tribalism there. I would go back to a couple of the things that Steve said. President Trump ran on cleaning up the swamp and standing up for working class people against the oligarchs.
Right.
So building warmer relationships with the business community wouldn't exactly fit that particular theme, and balance his warm relationship with Abe against the disastrous meeting with
You ask
Angela
us
Merkel.
to be trying to be positive.
All right, so I'm going to ask you.
Nothing.
So I'm obviously not going to ask you for a list of failures, since we just had a list of failures.
Right.
But which among these failures you've been citing, which are going to last? Which will have an impact a year, 2 years, 3 years from now, as opposed to transitory blips in the
Healthcare is the San Andreas fault of losses for this president. It has echo effects for a very long time, and it's changed the dynamic between Congress and Donald Trump. I think many members of Congress were intimidated by him, feared being harassed and challenged by him. I think that's changed. And so the consequences for him politically are now on a different track, in my view, but I also think that the intemperate way in which they rolled that out was damaging and will damage other efforts that they have.
Okay.
So we have, I think the only answer I can give to that is in many respects we just don't know. Steve is right about healthcare. We've seen an effort to blow up most of the alliances that have framed the post-World War II era, including NATO. But what we have is a struggle inside the administration between the disruptors, led by Steve Bannon, who are delighted with all of that, and the more pragmatic figures like General Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, and General McMaster, the National Security Advisor. I'd say one of the most heartening things that's happened is that after a rocky start, General McMaster is starting to gain some control over the National Security Council and get rid of some of the more disruptive figures there, including moving Bannon a little bit aside. And if the Mattises and McMasters of the world take over on foreign policy, we'll get at least some restoration of the normal order of things. If not, we're going to see, I think, a disruption that's going to change alliances around the world in ways that wouldn't necessarily be productive for the United States.
If I can just add one moment. I think what Norm said is very, very important. I think the damage has been done, that while he has shaken alliances, what's happened is now alliances depend very much on trust. It's not a trivial thing. The dark days require allies to work together and be able to depend on one another. There's so much doubt that's been injected now into our key relationships and how they plan and think about problems that they have, that all of them are discounting the likelihood that the United States will really be there with them. And so I just want to underscore what Norm said. It's really, really vital. I think the damage has been done. America is much weaker now today than it is, and many people may not see it or feel it, but the United States is not what it was a year ago.
Now, the other interesting thing is Donald Trump, deep in his personality, is that you never apologize for anything and you never accept blame yourself. So the first difficult moment that he had, which was the raid in Yemen that resulted in the loss of a Navy SEAL and a number of civilians, he blamed the generals. That was his first instinct. When the healthcare plan went down, he blamed the Freedom Caucus, the most conservative wing of Republicans in the House. He's had 3 domestic policy objectives: replacing Obamacare after repealing it, getting a massive tax reform plan through, and a big infrastructure program. It's possible that none of those things will happen. And if they don't, he will blame his own congressional leaders, the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, who's already under fire for not coming through on health policy, his own Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus, and the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell. And if legislative things don't make it through the Senate because Democrats filibuster them, he will put enormous pressure on McConnell to blow up the filibuster rule for legislation, which McConnell will resist. We may see a Republican Party more at war with itself if they don't accomplish any of his major legislative goals.
Okay, we only have a few seconds left. Let's think about the next 100 days. One sentence, what is in store? What should our viewers expect? Steve.
I think the president is going to push forward on a tax and infrastructure plan, and I think he's going to be going against very, very heavy, hard waters, and I agree with Norm that he is likely to find it both frustrating and not to get legislation passed. And we'll continue with paralysis, chaos, and impulsiveness consistent with what we've seen in the first 100 days.
Norm.
Critical question is which group within the White House will gain more control over the president's ear? The disruptors, led by Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller, or the pragmatists, led by his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and we don't know the answer to that.
Okay, on that note, gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Look forward to having you back to see whether the next 100 days are any different than the first 100 days. بهذا نصل لنهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة وخاصة حول سياسة الرئيس حيال الشرق الأوسط بعد 100 يوم. أرجو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@elhura.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف. شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء. مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. منذ عهد الرئيس فرانكلين روزفلت والذي بدأ إيصالاً من البرامج الحكومية لمحاربة الاقتصاد الكبير قبل 85 عاماً، صار لأول 100 يوم من عهد أي إدارة معنى قوي. هذا أول اختبار للرئيس الجديد. ماذا حقق خلال 100 يوم؟ هل وفى بوعود حملته الانتخابية؟ هل سن قوانين جديدة؟ هل غير سياسة أمريكية الخارجية؟ هل أحدث فارقاً بالفعل؟ بطبيعة الحال من الناحية التاريخية 100 يوم ما هي إلا لحظة عابرة. التغيير الحقيقي يستغرق وقتاً أطول بكثير، ولكن فكرة تقييم رئيس بعد 3 شهور فقط فكرة تلقى قبولاً واسعاً، وقد حان الوقت للنظر عن كذب إلا إدارة ترامب. ما الإنجازات الرئيسة للرئيس؟ ما إخفاقاته الرئيسة؟ هل اختار أشخاصاً حكماء وأكفاء للشغل أهم المناسب في الحكومة؟ هل حسن وضع أمريكا على الساحة الدولية؟ هل استجاب سوق الأوراق المالية استجابة إيجابية لقراراته الأولى؟ والسؤال الأساسي، هل يقود أمريكا في اتجاه الصحيح؟ الإجابة عن هذه الأسئلة المهمة حول أول 100 يوم لإدارة ترامب يسرني أن أرحب بلجنتنا التي تضم الخبيرين السياسيين نورمان أورنستين وستيف كليمنز. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. We're counting down now to the 100-day mark of the Trump administration, the traditional point at which we can make realistic assessments of what presidents have and haven't accomplished in office. And for that, I'm delighted to welcome our panel of political experts. Gentlemen, welcome back.
Great to be with
So
you.
the biggest move that President Trump has made, at least on the world stage, is military action in Syria. How do you evaluate this? What went into this decision? And is this a harbinger of where the administration is going on the world stage? Norm?
The answer to that is we don't know where the administration is going on the world stage. This was a set of actions taken by a president who didn't give us any clue during the campaign or even going into this that he would do something like this. And it was an action taken a week after his Secretary of State said that it's up to the Syrian people to decide what to do with Assad. So moving militarily and basically saying after this horrendous chemical attack on his own people in Syria, that the president had decided that this was a step too far, and then moving quite decisively towards this military action doesn't fit with what we've seen from the administration so far. And there's been no sign that I can see that there was a strategy plotted out where this was the first step in a chess game to determine what else they would do inside Syria. Now we have the Secretary of State basically saying it's time to remove Assad. Where do we go from here? We don't know.
So, Steve, this is a bold and decisive move by President Trump. How do you evaluate it?
I think what we see is the rise of generals and the fall of ideologues around Donald Trump. The ideologues like Steve Bannon and others around President Trump were very, very much against this kind of action, very much against expanding or owning any part of the Middle East in terms of American commitment of forces there. So Donald Trump has alienated already a significant portion of his ideological supporters. What I find interesting is there's not only just a big contradiction in what Donald Trump said he would do and wanting to take action against Assad, but Donald Trump did so in a way that wasn't coordinated with allies. Where was England? Where was France? Where were the Islamic nations? In December 2015, when President Obama organized a highly theatrical, flamboyant strike against ISIS, we had a great league of nations working with us. This chemical attack would have been an ideal opportunity for President Trump to demonstrate that he could work with allies and would tie them together, and it would not have taken a great deal of time to sort of bring them together to respond collectively to the outrage of what Assad did to his own people. So that's an interesting insight into him, that he continues, while taking action, he continues to be dismissive of allies who could actually amplify American power in times like this.
They did come out and support the president after the fact.
They did after the fact, but it just doesn't compare. And when you look back, President Obama, when he took action, whether one liked it or didn't like it, said you had to make an assessment of would the power deployed make a difference in anything? Could you get either international or regional instruments that legitimated the action? Was Congress with you? Was it limited in scope? There were a lot of criteria that President Obama applied to every military action, and he would allow these things to be debated. But Donald Trump didn't seem to have any of that criteria in this, other than reacting to an impulse of dying children in a gas attack. And we can debate whether that is humane and what a leader should do, or whether that kind of hijacking of the moment by emotion is actually not wise for the White House to engage in.
Norm, 100 days or so after the America First inaugural address, have we seen the end of an America First foreign policy?
And again, Rob, we don't know the answer to that. There are lots of contradictions here. Where do we go from here? You can take another set of steps that includes lobbing cruiser Tomahawk missiles in from warships that are off the coast. But how far is that going to get you in terms of actually confronting Assad and his war crimes and his continued leadership? And there's another element of this, which is you had a president who reacted with a visceral horror at watching these children and the victims. But this is the same president who won't let any of the refugees who are a part of this horror story leaving Syria come into the United States. So we don't know where this goes militarily. We don't know where it goes diplomatically. It appears most likely, at least, that the United States notified Russia of what they were going to do and where they were going to do it to avoid a direct confrontation with Russian deaths on the ground, which was a smart thing to do. But how you develop a set of coherent strategies in an administration that has not shown any signs of coherence.
But what we do know, just very quickly, what we do know is that the expectations of Syrian rebels will change because of this action. They will look for more. They will clamor for more and lobby for more. That once Donald Trump has taken action, now Syrian rebels and others will hope that he will now be on their side and deploy their force. The other audiences that were important for this were North Korea and China. And of course, while all of this action was going on, President Trump was having a summit meeting in Mar-a-Lago, his private estate, with the president of China, Xi Jinping. And I think that was as important a signal to China as it was to Bashar al-Assad in Russia, that this president will take action in a case like North Korea. And that raises the question of what would that action look like? Is it just a bombing impulse, or is it something where there's a real strategic plan to go? And we don't know that answer.
One can make an equally strong argument that this is useful leverage to cut a better deal with Russia vis-a-vis Syria and other issues of disagreement.
And yes, and of course we're waiting to see how the Iranians will react to this. One of the more interesting elements of this, though, is that all of the Russia propaganda arms, which speak with the same voice, and that includes American sympathizers, were saying one thing after this. C, Trump is going to be tough on Russia. What that says to me is that Trump is now not going to be tough on Russia, and we may be getting closer to a lifting of sanctions and possibly a deal with Russia, but that deal is not likely to be one that will really be favorable to American interests in the Middle East.
Politically, both sides of the aisle in the United States, Democrats in the House and the Senate, as well as, of course, Republicans, for the most part, supported the president on this. That's not a usual thing these days in American politics.
Well, I don't think that's actually true. I think that neoconservative members of the Republican Party, liberal internationalist members, folks like John McCain and Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, very supportive of the president. Rand Paul not. So that the wing, the same wing in healthcare, say the Freedom Caucus, the libertarian wing that has been problematic for the president, is basically holding itself at arm's length distance from what President Trump has just done. So you're correct that Democrats and Republicans that have been previous critics of Trump are now on board, but there are those supporters in both the Republican camp, and I would even say the Democrat, are uncomfortable with this action.
Yeah,
I would say that Senator Manchin is uncomfortable with this action.
What's important to remember is that much of the support from Democrats and some Republicans came with a giant caveat, that this was okay, but if there's anything more, the president needs to come to Congress for an authorization to use military force. And if what we see is another set of military actions, that consensus roughly, which doesn't include everybody, as Steve said, that is supportive of the president will fall apart pretty quickly.
All right, well, when we come back after the break, we're going to put the discussion of a recent attack on Syria in the broader context of the president's first 100 days in office in just a moment.